Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Sustainability Hub podcast. My name is Tom Willings. Today I'm joined by another of our sponsors, Elanco Animal Health. And with me in our studio in Peterborough, I've got George Tice, George Gould and Jackie Skelly. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to do some introductions because I'm only going to make a hash if I introduce your job titles and then try and give a description. So I'll turn to each of you. 3-on-1 is new for me. This is quite intense, and fair play to all of us. I can see we've all got comfort blanket papers and diligent research and preparation. I bet you we don't use them, but we'll see how we go. Jackie, why don't you take us away? What do you do at Elanco?
Thanks very much, Tom. Yeah, so I'm Jackie Skelly. I'm head of Veterinary Technical Services for the UK and Ireland. So I look after the team of primarily vets on the ground at Elanco who I do a broad range of things, but primarily look after all of our products, make sure that they are promoted and used responsibly. As part of that role, I sit on our country leadership team, and I'm kind of our champion for Elanco's ESG, environmental, social, and governance efforts there. So personal passion for this topic, and get involved in my day-to-day role as well.
Fantastic. George Gould.
So yes, I'm George Gould. I am the technical advisor in our international poultry team. So also veterinary background. And for the last 6 years, I've been working in the international team, primarily from a portfolio point of view, taking care of the technical aspect of our intestinal integrity portfolio, which includes our anticoccidials. And through that, I've found myself in this space, increasingly the sustainability space, which, similar to Jackie, I think it's quite a steep learning curve. I'm learning a lot, but I find it a fascinating area and one that I think we can learn a lot more and do a lot more. So yeah, very glad to be here.
Fantastic. Last but not least, George.
Well, Tom, actually, I don't work for Elanco directly now. I'm a consultant for them, but I did work for them for a terribly long time, 28 years, and I spent a significant part of that time working in the poultry industry and then in regulatory and public policy following that, particularly supporting the Elanco's feed additive portfolio from a policy and regulatory perspective. Since I finished with Elanco 3 years ago, I have been consulting with them, and I've had the privilege of helping Elanco think through how to position their products in terms of sustainability. It always was a passion of mine, and so I'm delighted to be here to discuss it.
You're also of a veterinary background.
I'm also a vet.
So I'm
also a vet.
It's
another
three
vet.
vets.
Another
three
vet.
vets around the table. I'm cooked.
Another vet. Another vet.
Yeah. Who wants to tackle who is Elanco? Let's just tell everyone about Elanco. Jackie, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that a little bit. So for anyone that's not aware, Elanco is a dedicated animal health company. So we are one of the market leaders across all different species. We produce a range of pharmaceutical and nutritional products. Across a range of species, from companion animals through to ruminants, and of course to poultry and swine, which is a big focus area for us. So we're a leading company, top 4 in all of the major markets internationally. So if you have products for animals, the chances are you have some of our products on your shelf. And we're very much an innovation-led organisation. So huge amounts of our investment is into that research and development area. So we're constantly bringing new products to market, new services, new way of doing things. That's the way that we like to operate and to think, I guess, as an organisation as well.
Today's about sustainability.
Yeah.
So we're here to try and sort of narrow our conversation on that topic. But go on. What's the link in with sustainability through Elanco?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several links. I mean, I think first of all, it's a focus for us as an organisation. I think we're very aware in that market leading position that we need to have our own house in order, and we have sustainability front and centre from a governance perspective, very senior roles looking after that. We've done a lot of work over the last few years in terms of calculating our baseline, understanding where we stand at the moment, and starting to put measures in place to get our own house in order, our footprint under control, whether that's energy, whether that's wastewater, packaging, etc. But I think dwarfed by that is the potential that we have as an organisation who works with farmers and producers around the world to actually help them on their own journey to cut emissions and to produce livestock more sustainably to meet that increasing global demand. So very, very exciting area of research for us is really thinking about what we can do with our existing portfolio, but also in the future to actually really directly benefit farmers with more sustainable protein production on the ground.
Yeah, I'm indebted to all of you for the material that you sent me in advance. It's given me plenty of evenings worth of reading. Didn't send me to sleep, Georgia. That's not what I'm saying. But
I'll leave you these bits of paper after.
Yeah, probably shows how little I knew to start with, and I don't know a great deal more now. But my word, have I learnt a lot through reading it. So let's try and make sure that we talk to all of the products and all of those benefits, because the sense I get is that your little bit in as a feed additive in the in the diet that's being fed to all of these birds, that little bit has an enormous effect on the sustainability of the chicken that so many people are consuming. So yeah, we'll look forward to getting into that conversation. Sustainability is a big kind of word, means all sorts of different things. There is a big picture here. I don't know if we want to just talk about how we define sustainability for the benefit of the conversation ahead.
Yeah, well, I'll have a go at that, Tom. Environmental social governance that Jackie referred to, I suppose that's where sustainability originally is defined. So what is the environmental, the social elements of a company's practice, and how do they govern themselves? And I would say that on the environmental and social side, for us in the poultry industry, and for those of us who serve the poultry industry, what it then divides down into is economic sustainability. So number one, do poultry producers and poultry farmers do they have economically sustainable businesses that can
Are they
employ
making
people?
a profit?
And continue to employ people? Can they produce affordable, high quality poultry meat for the community? And then so that's economic. And then of course there's the social or the ethical side. And I think what we would see in poultry is that welfare is a huge part of that.
Yeah.
So the broader community, those who look at both the poultry industry and those who supply the poultry industry, want to know about animal welfare and is it improving. And related to that, again, something we're very involved in is antibiotic use.
Yeah.
So antimicrobial resistance is a concern and relates to food safety. So that's a sort of ethical side, the economic side, and then of course the environmental side, which we're going to end up talking about more. But there's a lot that goes into that, and we'll talk about it more. But the footprint, obviously, we'll talk about the carbon footprint, but there's much else that is involved in understanding the environmental footprint of the poultry industry and how a company like Elanco can help to address that.
Yeah, I wonder if it's worth just diving straight into that footprinting side of things, because the carbon emissions calculations, etc., that they are or they've become the way that we measure sustainability in inverted commas, because it allows us to benchmark where we are today and set milestones for where we want to be tomorrow, and we're, of course, we're aiming at some pretty long-term global goals. Is that right?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And absolutely. I mean, the context is compelling, and it started. We all know this. It started in Paris. Well, it didn't. It started before that, but COP21, Paris, the Paris Agreement, limit climate temperature increase to 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And then what happened, of course, is that then fed down into legal frameworks and legislations in countries, and for us here in Europe and in the UK. And so then countries, the European Union and the UK, have made their own commitments, which are legally binding in terms of GHG reductions, net zero by 2050 for the UK. And I see now, just recently, the European Commission have proposed a 90% reduction in GHG by 2040. And these are legally binding requirements.
Like it or not, we're going there.
Yeah, and then what's happened after that is then fed down into legislation. And I think you talked about how uniquely pressurized this environment in Western Europe is in terms of sustainability, because of we'll talk about it later, but the concern about intensification. But also what is unusual about here, this part of the world, is we're going to regulate it. So there's the European Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, there's the EU Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, there's the UK Sustainability Reporting Standards, which are, parallel that very, very much. There's carbon disclosure mechanisms, there's a cross-border adjustment mechanisms that are coming. So these are all coming, which will require companies to measure and to reduce.
Yeah.
And if you're part of those supply chains, you need to be ready. And
You can't come up a level and look at the banks and is it
there you go.
TCFD, Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosure?
There you
They are going to be the
Yeah.
yeah, what's the word? You know, the lowest common denominator. That probably
Yeah,
sounds
they won't
awful
lend you
towards the
money
banks,
unless
but that's it.
Yep.
That's every business.
Yep, that's
Captured
right.
immediately. You know, they need to demonstrate that they're lending sustainably, responsibly, and yeah, we're all going to be playing by the same book of cards. But when we regulate over here, whether this country or Europe, we tend to then mean it, don't we? We tend to
Yes.
then try our absolute best to deliver against the promises.
And
that
there
we've
has
made.
been a sort of, even in the European Parliament, there's been a bit of a not in the UK Parliament, but a bit of a right-wing shift. Obviously, in the US, a significant right-wing shift, which has tried to back off that somewhat. But it hasn't. All that will happen is maybe a delay in implementation, an effort to make it more simple.
Yeah.
But it will not negate that in Western Europe, including the UK, we will need to measure and reduce.
Yeah. We need to bring this back to chickens because you know these big picture regulatory changes on the back of a very obviously necessary pressure in terms of addressing climate change are incredibly relevant to us in our market, producing the food that we are all involved with producing. Firstly, what is it? 30% of protein consumed, you know, is chicken, and secondly, we operate in a value chain, a supply chain, going through a handful of very, very large businesses with an awful lot of reputational kind of risk at stake, and we as an industry have got to play our part in delivering for them as our customers, you know, to improve the job. How do Elanco and their products play into that for your customers?
Can I just add one in?
Yeah.
You know, those big companies have made very clear commitments, which
Exactly.
are more aggressive, in fact, than the government commitments in their
Almost
public-
competitive.
Yes, yeah,
You know?
yeah. So very, very clear commitments. So you're dead right, Tom. Sorry,
I think
interrupted.
coming back to what you were saying, Tom, as you rightly say, poultry, chicken is now the most widely eaten meat globally and has been for a number of years. I think it was around 2018 it surpassed pork. And I think it's important to say that it's already a pretty, in terms of benchmarking against other sources of protein, it's already a very sustainable source of protein. But of course, we as an industry need to do better, particularly as it becomes more and more widely eaten.
I'm going to throw the stats out again. It was 30% of protein consumption is chicken.
Yes.
8% of livestock greenhouse gases are from chicken. So 30% bang.
And that tells a story in itself, right? That
Yeah.
chicken is a very relatively sustainable source of protein, but of course we can continue to do better. And I think one of the challenges that speaking to producers, our customers, effectively, is that this word sustainability is incredibly broad. And I suppose listening to what George said and yourself, Tom, when we think about those three pillars, social, which would include a big chunk of that would be animal welfare,
Yeah.
which is very high on the agenda. Then economic, of course, the business needs to remain sustainable, but also environment. That's when you speak to at a consumer level, most people, when they hear the word sustainability, will think about greenhouse gas emissions.
Absolutely.
I guess the question I'd have is, with the legislative framework, the regulatory framework coming down from, I suppose, from governmental level, and now being picked up at a retail level as well, that slightly sharpens the focus of areas we really need to be specific and trying to improve. And I think that's one of the things when we spent some time with customers last year, is that we've all heard the word sustainability a lot, but the feedback from the customers at that moment in time was, we're still not exactly clear where the destination we're trying to get to is and how we get there. And so it's very difficult to make progress if there's not much clarity. So I think having a framework, having a clear target, having a clear way of measuring is critically important, and knowing when we're talking about sustainability, what are we talking about? Is it footprint? Is it welfare? And let's be very specific and clear in that.
Can I just ask for a definition on a customer, just for anyone that's listening? I mean, who would you say are your customers?
I think Jackie and I would probably give different answers, which is the first thing.
Let's do both.
Parts of the business. So for me, I've grown up in Elanco in the poultry sector, almost entirely, and specifically within the broiler sector. So my customers with our portfolio would inevitably be the integrators, so the poultry farmers and the integrators. So that would be.
And then Jackie?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does depend on different parts of the business. You're right, but I think certainly I guess across the board, the veterinary sector very much are a big target for a lot of our products, and that's an area of our stakeholders who are really concerned about sustainability. So I think it's really important that we're having that conversation there as well. But I think when you look at Elanco's kind of wider vision and purpose, that goes all the way down to the end consumer or the end owner of animals. I think we talk about making life better, and that very much comes down to that end use of whatever product we might be talking about. So I think our customer base is very broad. I think that makes it very exciting. But again, I think we need to think when we talk about this topic, who are we speaking to,
and
why.
acknowledge that you could be talking to anybody in the value chain. Let's just go back to that uncertainty that you just referred to there, George, because I think there's an interesting point, and I wonder if it's, maybe this is contentious, but it is any of that uncertainty from your customers, if I take them as the integrators, does that come from this sort of UK and Western Europe demand for slower growing, destocked, reduced stocking density sheds, and the clear conflict between most efficient production and a rounded version of sustainability that takes puts greater emphasis on perceived welfare or the availability of best welfare outcome measures, etc. Is that why you think there might be? And if not, then what is causing that uncertainty?
I'd certainly say that's one of the main challenges is ensuring that we have clarity on what we're trying to achieve, but also make sure that we have joined up thinking. It's no good fixing a problem in one area if it creates a problem in another. I think I remember an ex-colleague of ours who was working in this space some years ago first described sustainability in the 3 pillars that George has mentioned as, think of it like 3 balloons that are all interconnected. If you squeeze hard on one, you're putting more air and more pressure on the other 2. And I think there are some instances where there will be a trade-off, and we have to decide what is it exactly we're trying to achieve, but be mindful of what that does in terms of other areas. So you mentioned the focusing very much on animal welfare. If the way we achieve that is through downstocking or using slower growing breeds, then we need to be mindful of what that does in terms of the economic aspect of poultry production, the affordability for the consumer, but also the carbon footprint of that production. If we're growing birds more slowly and they're perhaps less efficient, it might be seen as better from a welfare, but how does that impact the carbon footprint? And there probably is no perfect answer, but we just need to be mindful and joined up on that.
Yeah. George, you're going to come in there.
No, not especially, although I do think it comes back, you're talking about focus. I think, is it fair to say at the moment we have ended up focusing very much in terms of the value Elanco has, in terms of the value it tries to create for customers through its products, on indeed the carbon footprint element at this point. Now there's a lot of other things, obviously, and of course antimicrobial resistance, welfare, very important, and the other elements of environmental commitments such as water, nitrogen, phosphorus, such a big thing at the moment. But we've ended up focusing and trying to understand what the products do in terms of carbon footprint.
Yeah, and so what's that process undertaken, George?
Well, I would have thought George might be quite good to talk to this because of the sort of theory that you've thought through around the importance of bird health and sustainability.
Yes, I mean, I think that, as you say, it's a broad topic, but we're quite focused at the moment on not only the environmental aspect, but within that, the carbon footprint, the carbon emissions aspect of it. And that certainly, I think one of the reasons is that universally, globally, that is, there are different companies that at a granular level will have other things they're focused on, whether that be welfare or other areas of sustainability. But carbon footprint's pretty universal at the moment certainly in broiler production and poultry more widely. So we've really focused in on that. And I think one of the learnings I've had over the last perhaps 2-3 years of working in this space and actually listening to another one of your podcasts with some colleagues from Trowel was that very much reinforced what we'd already heard and what we'd already learned, which is 80% of the carbon footprint of broiler production happens off the farm. So it's really interesting to me that when I first started in this space and speaking to customers and trying to learn from them, what are they doing? Probably the buzzwords I heard more often than not were solar panels, wind turbines, and looking at energy sources. And actually, when you really get into it, you realize that, of course, those things are great and they're admirable, but they're a drop in the ocean compared to actually where the real source of carbon is.
Well, when you're talking about a carbon footprint, it might be a really good idea from a business resilience point of view, from a security of supply, from a cost management point of view, but from a carbon footprint point of view,
it's making a relatively negligible difference.
Because it's all about feed.
it's all about feed. So between 70 and 80% of the carbon footprint of a chicken is the feed you put in front of it. So that then led us to thinking about that kind of sharpened our focus a little, if you like, in terms of we need to make sure we're doing things which make the bird more efficient with the feed, and we need to do things to reduce the absolute carbon footprint of the feed. And so that then, the way we frame that in Elanco is as an inside the bird strategy and an outside the bird strategy. And that's, I suppose, is the backbone of where we are in terms of our work with customers on that. In that space.
Your products have stood the test of time, haven't they? They've got enormous uptake. I don't know.
Some of them are pretty old. Some of them
are old enough.
Some of them are old enough. Yeah.
But again, they're focused on the efficiency of feed, and I would imagine at the point that they were introduced and have been so widely adopted, it's because they deliver that economic benefit. There is a clear,
Yes. Well, I mean,
I think there's always this. I talked about us as an innovation company, and it's funny that you point this out because absolutely some of our still most innovative products actually are very old, and I think it's it's sometimes tempting to jump on the bandwagon of the next big thing, but that's not always the right way to go. Actually, I think sometimes.
But what I think if I were a customer, whether I was a retailer or I was in the chain in between the grower and the retailer, I'd take enormous confidence from the fact that they have stood the test of time, and the science behind their creation, but also then the research that you've done subsequently that then puts another string to the bow from this new aspect of sustainability, and measures their impact or measures the impact of their production and the net impact of then their deployment in the field.
Well, absolutely, and I think it's important to recognise that. You mentioned the sort of the economic aspect with regard to the products, but it's important to understand that certainly the products we're dealing with, today are all rooted in first and foremost in tackling a health challenge, or in the birds themselves. So they're rooted in improving animal health first.
Are you going to talk about what the products are? Tell us what those products are, John.
We certainly can. But no, what I wanted to say is that that there's a kind of common thread with all of this, which we're kind of learning as we go in sustainability. That first and foremost, products that improve animal health. So we'll talk about coccidiosis, for example, will be one area. It's a ubiquitous challenge, right, in chicken production and broiler production, and anticoccidials and a strong program is crucial to first and foremost protect the health of the bird. Now, as a result of having better gut health, reduced disease challenge, you are going to get better performance, and that yields an economic benefit. And that's obviously fairly straightforward and something we've been aware of for decades. And so we've almost been, if you like, positioning those products on those two fronts. So looking after animal health, intestinal integrity is a phrase you'll hear from Elanco a lot, and yielding better performance as a result. What we've learned recently is that there's, as you mentioned, there's kind of another string to the bow here, which is because feed is such a large chunk of the carbon cost of producing poultry, if we can improve the gut health, it inevitably leads to better feed efficiency, better feed conversion ratio in those birds, which has an economic benefit for the customers, but also a carbon reduction benefit. And so effectively, that having good gut health, for me, as I'm a little bit biased because I've had 11 years working in the intestinal integrity space, but for me, intestinal integrity is one of those areas where actually across those three pillars, we don't have to make trade-offs. If you've got better gut health, the birds are going to be healthier, so you've got better welfare. They are going to be more higher performing flock, so you're going to have more profitability, and they're going to use less feed to produce the same amount of protein, so you're going to have less carbon footprint. So for me, there's a win-win-win there rather than looking at trade-offs. So I think gut health, I've always been passionate about gut health, and now I'm even more so. Now we're bringing in sustainability. So yeah, absolutely.
And your customers will obviously love the efficiency gain. Do you want to talk through the life cycle analyses that you've done and the supporting evidence that says this isn't just good from a performance point of view, actually this is great from a planetary point of view as well?
Well, I can make a start, and then I think I'll probably hand to George because he's been heavily involved in this as well. That I think before we wanted to get into looking at the benefits of our products through a lens of sustainability, it's important to I think, not least from a credibility point of view, but also to know what the net impact of our products is, to look at their own footprint and the footprint of our own operation. So I think we can talk about both the product aspect of that and also the wider operation part of that with George and Jackie.
Yeah, so I think most of the investment that Elanco have made has been actually in the Hemicell product range, which is a beta-manganase, so it digests beta-mannans, which are antinutritive factors, and if they are left undigested, they induce a feed-induced immune response, which reduces the effectiveness of nutrient digestion. And so that's the first one. We'll talk more about that, the Hemicell portfolio. And the second one, Maxiban and Montiban, which are the heart of the Elanco's anticoccidial portfolio. So we've looked, or Elanco have invested to look at both the life cycle, a life cycle assessment of the product, the manufacturing process, but also a way of understanding what the impact of that product will be on carbon footprint. We know the health and the performance benefit now, and therefore the economic benefit, and that's why the products are sold. But what about the carbon footprint benefit? So, as you said, there are two steps to that. The first step is you have to do a life cycle assessment on the products themselves, because you need to know what's going in.
Yeah.
And indeed, we contracted Blanc sustainability consultants, and for the products, the feed additive products, they worked very hard with our manufacturing sites and our distribution process, and they applied the appropriate guidelines, ISO 1440, 44 and 1440, 40, also the LEAP guidelines on LCA, life cycle assessment of feed additives, and the product environmental footprint category rules for feed that the European Union have published. So those were applied. They used their agri-footprints database to calculate what the environmental impact of the manufacture of these products is. Carbon's part of it, obviously water, acidification, eutrophication, etc. as well. And those are now available. We know the data. They were, as part of the ISO process, so independently reviewed, and we make those available to customers, so they know. Well, Elanco make those available to customers, so the customers know what's going in.
So it's a big investment again in the trustworthiness, the credibility of those results. Like firstly, with the firm that you've chosen to actually undertake that work, Blanc would be, I'm sure, recognised as the leader in that space. Elanco would come off incredibly well with having been, rigorous enough to have that measured and be in a place to talk about it from an informed.
Yeah, no, it's good, and it's as you would know, it's a detailed assessment. You've got all the inputs, raw materials, energy, and then the outputs: water, waste, plastic, packaging. It's a huge process with as is in many industries, with lots and lots of lines in a spreadsheet. Yeah. And you then have to make sure that the methodology you use is validated, and you use an external consultant an external expert to do that.
So you've got your measures for your products.
Yep. Okay.
And then
then we looked at the impact of the products.
I've done an awful lot of reading. I'd like to say I'd throw my hat in the ring as an enthusiastic amateur. If you want me to talk about Hemicell to
you can
your audience,
give it a go if you want, or we can just hope no nutritionists are listening and then they'll haul me over the coals.
I've never heard the word beta-manganase before.
Hemicell is a beta-manganase.
It's an enzyme.
It's an enzyme, right? And it's a beta-manganase, which I think, please correct me if I get this wrong, George, but so there are beta-mannans present in many raw ingredients that we put in poultry feed. Now, beta-mannans are quite interesting because they have, this is where we're going to get a bit technical, Tom. So they have,
love it.
I can already hear our nutritional technical consultant on my shoulder.
They're not in the room, so let's go.
So beta-mannans are interesting because they have some molecular patterns on their surface, which to the bird's immune system are very closely related or similar to some pathogen molecular patterns. So essentially something called a pathogen associated molecular pattern, or a PAMP, or PAMP, which the bird's immune system looks at beta-mannan, which is just a harmful piece of the raw ingredient, but it sees a pathogen and it switches on its immune system. Now that immune system has a cost, and effectively if there's beta-mannans present in the diet at a high enough level, it can cause an immune response which wastes energy up to about 3% of metabolizable energy. Now, this is hugely inefficient. It also causes problems in terms of viscosity of the digester in the gut, in terms of the inflammation in the gut. So generally, you lose a bit of intestinal integrity, you're losing a bit of broiler efficiency. So what Hemicell does is it takes that beta-mannan, which is a long chain, it cuts it into lots of little pieces, so the bird can no longer recognize it as a pathogen, even though it's not. It's essentially a very costly example of mistaken identity. And so Hemicell prevents that from happening, and essentially spares that loss of energy. Now, one way you can use Hemicell is you can take energy out of the diet, put Hemicell back in, and effectively maintain the performance while lowering
Lower
feed
input,
costs.
yeah.
But also the things you've taken out, the fats and oils you may have taken out, depending on what they are, depending on the diet, that's the caveat I'm putting in here, they may have high carbon high carbon costs as well, and Hemicell has a low carbon cost. So you're getting net carbon improvement as well as net cost.
So if we're talking about the biggest potential gain, it's taking out something like soy oil, soybean meal, which of course attached to that is going to be likely a fairly hefty land use change
Exactly.
contribution, and even just a little bit of Hemicell and a little bit of soy taken out, suddenly big improvement in carbon footprint.
And everything's relative. I mean, we're looking at incremental. There's no. I think we've talked about this before. There's no one silver bullet that's going to suddenly reduce our carbon footprint by 30-40%. But if we can do things which make inroads into the feed, the footprint of the feed.
Well, if it's 5% of feed conversion ratio over here and it's a couple of percent on carbon footprint over there, then it all adds up, doesn't it?
To add up, exactly.
Can I be a little bit nerdy? Is that the important thing I believe was that when what we again went through an ISO process on the estimate of the likely impact on a representative diet in Europe. So we had an independent nutritionist do two things. Firstly, validate that if he took 60 kilocalories of energy out of a matrix, there would be no performance change. And then he adapted the diets accordingly. Those diets were then fed into the Simmer Pro system, which again was consistent with the product environmental footprint category rules by Blanc consultants, and they came out with the 2.5% figure. So it was again, and that was then externally reviewed by a consultant. So it was done again to the ISO standards, and Elanco can be very confident that in many diets there will be a 2.7 to 3.3 reduction in the carbon footprint associated with the inclusion of Hemicell. So Elanco worked hard to get that validated so they could become confident as they spoke to their customers.
Yeah. So that's Hemicell, and then Maxiban, Monteban, same thing.
So same thing again, very similar process. The first thing was to do the life cycle assessment of the manufacturing sites, the manufacture of the products, the bags of Maxiban, bags of Monteban, anticoccidial that go to the customers. Same guidelines, so it's the same process that I described with Hemicell. So we then understood the customers understand what's going in. But in terms of the measurement of the impact, the focus, and we worked a lot on this, trying to figure this one out, didn't we, George? The focus was on FCR and trying to model if the customer could think, was satisfied that this would be the FCR impact of improving his intestinal health associated with the use of a program using these products, what would that mean? I don't know if you want to talk.
Yeah, so light bulb moment's probably too strong a term, but I think there's certainly a realization through the journey we've all been on in sustainability that anchoring back to that really important point that feed is the single biggest source of carbon for poultry production. If we can be more efficient with it, i.e. improving our FCR, or use less of it to create the same amount of protein, then there's gains to be made in carbon footprint. Now, I've been working with the branding that you mentioned, the Maxiban, for 11 years. And what we tend to do commercially or demonstrate commercially is that this product, through better cocci control, stronger coccidiosis control, will yield a better feed efficiency of the broiler as the primary metric that our producers, that our customers are really interested in. So when we're talking about switching to Maxiban or changing to a longer Maxiban program, invariably the question is, well, what's that going to do to my FCR? And historically, we've always taken that and translated that into an economic number.
Yeah.
Cents per bird, pence per bird, whatever it may be. What we realized in this space is that not only is there an economic gain to be had, but there's also a carbon footprint reduction gain. So we worked very closely again with Blanc Consultancy to try and develop a calculator, which was actually agnostic of product and agnostic of solution, simply saying, under these given conditions, so let's assume you're growing a 2.2 kilo broiler and you're paying X pounds per tonne per feed. In the UK, under UK production conditions, standard UK diet, what if we could somehow implement a solution which would reduce or improve the FCR by 5 points, let's say, what would that do economically, which they already know by and large, but what would that do in terms of carbon footprint? And I think that's a really useful tool to have just to start to quantify. And it's not a measuring tool, right? It's not like, I know there's lots of measuring tools out there. It's not a promise, it's not a measurement, but it's indicative of, if we could find a solution which did that to FCR, what would it do to our footprint? And then we obviously have lots and lots of data which demonstrates, by having a more appropriate program in place to control gut health, intestinal integrity, coccidiosis, you can expect changes in FCR of the magnitude of whatever it may be. And so we're just trying to tie those things together with this calculator.
So this calculator is not yet in its full formed.
No, it is. It is, and we use it. We have used it with customers yet. But as I said, it's totally agnostic of product. So it's simply you plug in bird weight, feed cost, the country you're producing chicken in. So it's a global calculator, and we work with Blanc to run a series of predictive models based on standard diets in each of those countries and standard conditions in those countries to generate what the footprint would be if you improved the FCR from a baseline of that you select as well. So yeah.
Indicative. So obviously, and I know you'd be very familiar with this. Then companies can then go on to look at it themselves, right? Because they'll have their own feed formulation and be able to assess the feed conversion impact using their feed conversion, their feed formulation.
I could imagine a tool like that being incredibly valuable to your customers, because this whole I'd say decarbonisation as though that's just a one-off decision, but it's not. This is a very, very slow process of incremental change and scenario modelling with something that can be agnostic and can, just be applied with the next theory. It would be a very powerful way of trying to determine what your strategy is to edge away at this 30% reduction.
I'm glad you said that, Tom. Well, you certainly hope so. That was the intention behind building it. But yeah, that's very validating. No, I think that almost the key objective from my perspective is sometimes there's that trade-off that we talked about, that it's seen as you can't be economically sustainable and environmentally sustainable. And actually, there are some areas where there's a win-win. And I think if we can, as long as it's not compromising somewhere else, if we can find solutions which can improve feed efficiency, clearly there's massive carbon benefits. And it's just about getting people to see, when they're making those decisions about, do I want to invest in a little bit more in my feed costs to achieve an FCR improvement? It's no longer just the economic gains, it's the other benefits that come with that. And that's kind of where I'd really like people to reach, is to use that calculator to look at the full suite of benefits of doing this, rather than just focusing purely on the economics.
And is there a corporate level consideration here as well, about being the one to provide these tools and being the authority in not only the product from an efficiency point of view and from a health point of view, but also from a sustainability point of view? Is it kind of how Elanco wants to be seen corporately?
Yeah, very much. I think back again, because it is that win-win-win really, and I think we're very aware as leaders in the market that we want to lead by example, and hopefully others will follow, and there's a positive feedback loop there. But yeah, I mean, we've been very clear, and our CEO's been very clear on a number of occasions that sustainability is absolutely a core strategic focus for us for the next 10 years, if not beyond. So yeah, I think we that commitment is unwavering, and I think we talk about innovation in terms of products, but also in terms of tools and services and support. And I think we've always had that mindset, quite entrepreneurial, I guess, of let's come up with new ways of doing things and new ways of looking at it. And I think we will continue to learn from experiences like this to take that and expand it elsewhere. And yeah, for sure, I think the message I'd give from an Elanco perspective is that focus on sustainability won't be going away. It's a really exciting place for us, for a lot of different reasons, and hopefully for our customers as well.
And how important is chicken? I mean, Elanco Animal Health, massive organisation, multi-species, but just how important is chicken in that whole ESG?
Yeah, really important. I mean, we're balanced. Our portfolio is pretty balanced now across companion animal and farm, but I think on that farm side, we still have a really significant chicken. I don't know if you probably know the more up-to-date stats than me, George, but chicken has historically been a huge part of our business, and that certainly isn't going away. No. I think we're going to see more and more innovation and focus in this space going forwards.
Certainly outside the US and in across Asia, it's all about a huge amount of Elanco's business is chicken, and investment is chicken, right?
Yeah. Although I don't know if we want to go into the sort of in terms of the UK portfolio, there are products which we don't have here, but in other parts of the world, I don't know if Jackie wanted to speak to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we won't get down to the granular product level, but I think, I mean, in the US, there's a huge opportunity in cattle sustainability. Obviously, cattle production is very different in the US compared to the UK, and we already have some products on the market there with some really exciting direct sustainability benefits, whether that's reduction in methane emissions or reduction in ammonia, etc. So looking at it very much across all species on the farm side, but I think we will see more. There's lots of investment going on in the poultry space as well, so I think we'll see more coming out of there. It's we hear a lot of noise. We're a US headquartered company, so a lot of what you'll hear from a global point of view originates with that US market and the US investor in mind, but actually we're pretty balanced internationally between the US being about 50% of our business and the rest of the world being the other 50%, and that diversity, if you like, is one of our strengths. So what you hear isn't always necessarily what's reflective of what's going on in the background, I suppose. Fair to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, question for you, just going back to what you said about the calculator tool that we've developed and is kind of ready to use and out there. Our customers kind of grabbing it. Is it a big opportunity? I think it is to a degree, but I think in its strength, or it becomes even more compelling a proposition to a customer if it can be paired with a really accurate measurement tool at the other end of the process. So the way I see it is that you use the calculator to demonstrate, hey, we could perhaps do something with your program or with some products or with some interventions which would improve your FCR by X points. The model shows us that will give us an improvement in footprint in the range of X in terms of using the model we've got. And then you implement that solution and then you measure it very accurately using one of the tools out there. I mean, I know Eggbase is one of them. Is the challenge I think we have at the moment, and I saw this on a previous podcast you did, which was, do you think we're getting close to a point where there is enough standardization in the way we measure and the way people report footprint at a meat production level, at a poultry production level, and how do we get there?
Yeah, wow, what a question! Do I think there's enough harmonization? I think there is room for improvement, absolutely, in across all of the calculators. I think there are very, very different purposes behind the development of each. Take Eggbase as the example, and obviously I'm employed by Eggbase, so I should declare that to anyone who didn't know that was listening. Our tool is unashamedly specific to poultry and poultry farming, and so our boundary is the crucial word in anything to do with emissions reporting. Our boundary is absolutely square around the building or the pasture if the birds have got access to range. Whereas you go and look at some of the other tools and they are more whole farm and of incredible complexity, because there's all sorts of breadth of activity taking place on that farm, and they'll be far more detailed in terms of soil treatments and things that are outside of a typical poultry farm boundary. So immediately you've got a mismatch in terms of the purpose and the design of those tools. I think from a feed point of view, you come back to feed being 75-80% of the report on a poultry farm. I'd say there's pretty good harmonization. There is a single kind of best in class database that everyone uses, GFLI, for feed raw materials. The supply chain, the operational delivery from the point that those crops are grown to consumption is a relatively minor part of the overall emissions. And yes, there's lots of different ways of people kind of calculate that, but I think the end result is still a comparable number in most cases, so long as land use change is included. And that's, DEFRA did a harmonization report that was published 18 months or so ago, and it was incredible to see that I think there were only half a dozen agricultural calculators shortlisted, and there was inconsistency at that point as to whether land use change was or wasn't included. I think those days have done.
So land use change now would be, as standard, would be included.
I can't speak for every tool that's on the market, but I'd be very surprised if there were still people looking to measure poultry farm emissions who were not taking account of land use change in their
And our exposure to that is both in the LCA and the calculator, that all of the values we create are including and excluding. We have to have both values, but I think it makes sense to harmonise.
I think there's a really interesting debate further up the chain when you get into integrator who have got deep connections with the animal feed industry, the global feed supply chains, and then you go further into the supermarket. Soy from minute one has been identified as being the source of the greatest opportunity to have a material impact on the carbon footprint, and one potential solution, if you want to reduce the impact of your chicken or your egg, is to find a different source of protein, either North American soy without the burden of that land use change, or something that we've grown closer to home. And the debate has been, well, is that the right thing to do, or are we simply either paying to elect to make such a choice, and actually globally we've made no difference because somebody else is still buying that raw material? Is the problem the crop itself, or is it a more political issue back where those crops are being grown? And it's to an extent, I suppose, personally, just speaking personally, it would not have surprised me to have seen our market in the UK run more quickly towards a set of soy-free products on the shelf for that very simple reason, that you could then label your product as being of improved environmental impact. But we haven't really. There's a few.
Mentioned the shelf, as it were. And one of the questions I had, and apologies if I'm kind of behind the curve on this, and you can say they already are, but do you think we're far away from a situation where chicken packaging could actually have the carbon footprint on it, as a sort of to really inform the consumer? And at that point, it's critical that the measurements are harmonised, because otherwise you're comparing apples and oranges.
I can't claim to know the answer to that, so I don't have any kind of inside knowledge. I am aware that there's been work ongoing for at least a couple of years by in conjunction with government agencies to review exactly that. There's been an enormous kind of partnership across industry and up and down the supply chain sort of project to try to evaluate exactly what it would take to get to that point. And I think probably from that, the harmonization word has become ever more important, because if we've got X number of tools and we don't get the same outcome when we put the same inputs into the calculator, then how can we be sure we're comparing like with like? It's difficult. So maybe that's why that's been put on hold. There are products on the shelf. I haven't seen it. I don't think I've seen it with chicken meat, but certainly eggs that are low carbon and independently verified as being such. I think Morrison's have got a kite marked egg on the shelf. Again, I know Egg Base are involved in that, obviously, but how far away are we? I'm not sure, because certainly my perception would be, in the course of the last 6-7 months, there's been a slight shift in the dial as to where the environmental priorities now rank against some of the other issues that are more kind of economic defence, other issues facing the country.
Because do we know how the consumer feels about that and what the impact's been? Because I guess ultimately that's going to be what drives how much interest there is doing that more broadly.
Okay, so again, this would be chapter according to Tom Willings only. I think I'd look at the success of those products that have been launched with that USP being about the environmental impact, and I think I'd say on my little soapbox that there hasn't been a tremendous amount of commercial success, and if anything, those kind of pioneers, if you like, those that have been quick to launch products in the market, whether those products are 100% what they purport to be, and I'm not saying they're not, but they've been operating in a marketplace where other products, food and non-food, have then been hauled over the coals for kind of questionable ethics about, greenwashing,
Greenwashing.
Yeah.
carbon credit offsetting, etc., etc. What's actually different? When you can offset your flight, across the Atlantic by just ticking this box on a website, you're still flying. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's, it's a bit difficult. So I think from a consumer point of view, I can well understand, kind of once bitten, twice shy. You say it's good, but is it actually different?
Yeah,
Well,
it's
there
a
is
huge
consciousness from regulators that they will have to regulate this.
Yeah.
They will have to standardize and
Is it?
regulate. But the task is enormous.
Monumental. It all comes down. Surely it doesn't all come down to money. At the end of the day, there's a taxation process here of almost, I suppose in our world, farming and agricultural development, like the polluter pays model. You create the risk, you better pay to clear it up, kind of thing. And that requires measurement, and that requires some enormous brains to work out financially how that can be sustained.
I was just thinking from the consumer's perspective. I mean, you don't have to go back too many years for it to be highly unusual to see on a menu at a restaurant or even a fast food outlet the calories, and yet we now as a consumer are very conditioned to seeing, and it strikes me as it's quite analogous, right? There needs to be a database of what is 100 grams of chicken in terms of calories, what is 100 grams of chicken in terms of carbon.
Well, of course, a lot of that science is like 50 years old.
Yeah.
What it's all calorie counting based on, was it combustible? Burn it in a petri dish and then work out how long it takes to turn into charcoal, and there we go. That's how many. I have no idea, as I'm ably demonstrating, but it's pretty certain it's a very, very long in the tooth set of numbers that we still hang our hat on.
I mean, if we look at the big things that the industry has measured over the years in terms of other elements of sustainability, it's been significantly easier. For example, welfare, pododermatitis, lameness, you can go in and measure those things.
Although I still think that welfare's got a long way to go in terms of getting metrics which are really, really. So pododermatitis is only really one aspect of welfare. There's many ways in animal welfare can suffer, and I do think that it's one of the harder areas to get really tangible metrics where we can say we've improved from X to Y. But sorry, I kind of
but it has let's have it has been measured.
It has been measured,
and for example, retailers have said, right, we want these metrics. Your flock mortality, we want this, we want that, we want that.
Absolutely,
and those are hard metrics that are relatively easy to measure. Same as antibiotic use, right? So antibiotic use.
Very measurable.
Milligram per kilogram.
Prescriptions from veterinarians, measurable. But the carbon measurement is so complicated and therefore invariably has such variability in it. It's different to those. Well, you're saying about welfare, it's more complex.
I guess linking it back to welfare, it's complicated, but it's also what we end up with is much more comprehensive than I think welfare. So I suppose there's pros and cons to both sides.
That's true.
We
and science-based,
and
evidence-based.
I think getting 3 vets to try and discuss welfare.
We're going to get 30 different opinions.
We could be here. We could be here for a while. It is a fascinating topic. We should look to wrap up. So who wants to give us sort of a final Elanco position? You're doing extraordinary work for the industry, global industry, extraordinary work in supporting your customers as your customers look to, present their progress in terms of protecting the environment as well as feeding us, safe, nutritious, value food. Tremendous job by the animal in terms of protecting its health and improving productivity. But how would you kind of summarize all of your work from a corporate position?
I'll have a go. I'm sure the others will want to follow. But I mean, I think I'd say first of all, as Elanco, we're coming at this kind of, I hope with some humility. I think if this conversation's taught us anything, it's what a journey we're on and how complicated this topic is. But I think our goal is very much to be working with our customers, whatever sector they are in, and I guess learning together. And I think the point that I would make is that this isn't going away from our point of view, and I hope that people understand when they are choosing to partner with us and choosing to invest in us, they can be confident that some of that is going back into reinvesting in this area for the future, so that hopefully we will be an organisation who are a partner to progress, really, will be that, probably slower than everybody would like because of the vast complexities in this area. But we really hope to keep talking about this topic with stakeholders from all over the industry, really.
That sounds like George.
From an it is an outside perspective now. I think that poultry or broiler customers can be confident that they are dealing with an institution that is committed to sustainability. Their own house is not completely in order, but there's a huge effort to make sure their own house is in order, plus to do the rigor to ensure that they can tell the truth about the impact of their products on sustainability. The reason that customers buy them is for health and economics, but what is the truth about the impact of these products on the sustainability of the operations? They can have confidence that Elanco will tell them that because of the investments that have been made.
Fantastic. George, anything you wanted to add?
Well, I'm just debating whether I want to add it. I don't know if I build on anything that's already been said. I think picking up a little bit what Jackie would say, I think it's very tempting to be wrapped up in everything we're doing in sustainability and position ourselves as you know, a significant the partner to provide all the solutions. I think it's important to have some humility. There's, as I said earlier, I don't think there's one silver bullet or single thing that the industry is going to do to reach all their targets, either in carbon footprint or in wider sustainability goals. But I think our commitment is that we are looking continuously and very rigorously at our existing portfolio to say, are there ways in which we can quantify and help our customers understand the value proposition in that sustainability space? And additionally, as Jackie's saying, we're reinvesting an awful lot into looking, are there products we haven't yet got or technologies that don't yet exist, which we could help develop and bring to the market, which will maybe be more specifically directly built to improve sustainability. Now, let's be clear, the two products we've talked about today, Hemicell, Maxiban, neither of them were designed through a lens of sustainability. The benefits we are creating in sustainability are almost byproducts of other things they do. But there may well be products in the future that we bring to the market which are specifically bringing sustainability improvements to the customer, rather than perhaps more the health-derived benefits that these products were created for. So I don't know if that helps or adds.
I'd say that's a great place to leave it. I think you've all of you summarised very neatly what it's all about. So thank you for joining us, Jackie, George, and George. Pleasure to have you here. Very enjoyable conversation. You've been listening to the Sustainability Hub podcast. Until next time, thank you.